So let's now move on to our next session. And indeed, an important one, this data-driven smart cities and urban governance. And to moderate this session, we have Ms. Meghna Mittal. She's from PwC. And let me introduce the session to you that the objective is that Indian cities are all set to receive a kind of urban overhaul, while the Government of India, Ministry of Urban Affairs, has set in mission mode to upgrade their urban retrofitting of 100 plus urban cities in future format with more and more modern technologies. So, and the objective is to upgrade citizens' lifestyle. Taking forward on how Indian smart cities are driven and by data and urban governance, progressing with optimum data management, we'll have this session wherein we have very eminent panelists in this session. We have Dr. Sanjay Kolte, Chief Executive Officer, Pune Smart City Development Corporation Limited. A very warm welcome to you, Dr. Sanjay Kolte. We are beginning a very important session, which is data-driven smart cities and urban governance. As we all know that Indian cities are all set to receive some kind of urban overhaul, while the Government of India, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, has set in a mission mode to upgrade urban retrofitting of 100 plus urban cities in future format with more and more modern technologies introduced for upgrading citizens' lifestyle. Well, to take this discussion forward, we have a very eminent panel with us. We have Dr. Sanjay Kolte, Chief Executive Officer, Pune Smart City Development Corporation Limited. A very warm welcome to you, sir, to our summit and to this
Hello.
session.
Hello, good afternoon to all.
Good afternoon, sir. And we have Sri Nikhil Tikaram Punde, and to represent him, we have Mr. Anand Menon from Agra Smart City Project. Agra Smart City Limited, and Mr. Anand Menon is Project Planning and Management Specialist. A very warm welcome to you, Mr. Anand Menon. And we have Ms. Jayati Singh, CEO, Gwalior Smart City Development Corporation. A very warm welcome to Ms. Jayati Singh. We have Sri Chetan K. Nandani, Chief Executive Officer, Rajkot Smart City Development Limited. Very warm welcome to Sri Chetan K. Nandani ji. Sri Raj Cherubal, CEO, Chennai Smart City Limited. A very warm welcome to you. And Sri Braj Bhushan, Head Government Business, Reverie Language Technologies. A very warm welcome to you. And to moderate this session, we have Ms. Meghna Mittal from PwC. Over to you, Meghna.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Let me just set off by saying how excited I am to moderate this session of esteemed speakers. And all the city representatives here have actually played a huge role in demonstrating data-driven governance and contributing to the agenda of data smart cities, as was set out by the Smart Cities mission of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. So welcome everyone to this panel. This is a great time for cities as more and more of our people are moving to the urban setting in the next couple of decades. It would be where majority of our people will be living. It is about time to start thinking about how we are building our cities and how they are being built for their own people. Cities are at the center of all economic activities. They're also faced by different challenges due to the ever-changing needs. An important question that can be asked today is, are cities driving urban governance using data? And this is the right time to ask this question because with the deployment of technologies and with the adoption and use of IoT devices and sensors, and with the use of a large amount of data, cities are generating a large amount of data. Now, it is upon these cities to understand and to make value of that data. by value, it's not only monetary value, but the way in which cities are attractive to businesses, how we manage the quality of citizen service delivery, how we're able to increase or enhance productivity of governments, how we're able to enhance societal inclusiveness and also environmental sustainability. In addition to being tech-abled, I feel that the growth of our cities will also be depending on data-driven governance. Earlier, we had Shri Rahul Kapoor take us in a great deal of depth about how the Smart Cities mission has been focusing on the agenda of data smart cities to actually support and guide cities to take on this journey with them and to actually help them create institutional structures, create structures and create platforms and processes that will help them navigate themselves through this journey. Some of those initiatives that were mentioned earlier was creation of a data smart city strategy, which is sort of a guideline which cities can use for supporting themselves to create this infrastructure. A data maturity assessment framework is released every year where cities are actually assessed basis their data maturity. Also, data policies are being encouraged to be made with cities, which will help cities better manage the data. And also different platforms which are being created for exchange of data, which is going to create a combinatorial value to everybody involved. With this, we will start a panel discussion. I will be asking 2 questions to each panelist. And in the interest of time, we will try to limit this for 5 minutes per panelist. We'll start with Dr. Sanjay Kolte, CEO, Pune Smart Cities. Pune has been at the forefront of various data initiatives and realizing their outcomes. This can be actually seen with the last 2 sessions of data maturity assessment framework, where Pune has been in the top 5 cities both the times. How do you think Pune is able to manage that, and what do you think Pune city is doing differently to be able to maintain that?
Yeah. Thank you for giving Pune Smart City this opportunity to be part of this Governance Now Summit. In Pune Smart City, while handling various aspects of Smart City mission, like mobility, management of water, wastewater, solid wastes, health, education, safety, energy, while doing this, lot of data, huge amount of data is being generated from various by various stakeholders, various government departments, private sector agencies, as well as the community organizations which are working in tandem with us. Now, these data smart cities and the various stakeholders are, while working, they are vertically integrated in their functions. Such is the structure of smart city mission working. And now unlocking and making the data which has been generated or gathered to make it available to the various stakeholders, citizens, city administrators, that is the real challenge. And in Pune Smart City, this city has a separate dedicated data policy. Open data portal has been created by Pune Municipal Corporation, and which is where the Pune Smart City data is also being actively uploaded on the India Urban Data Exchange and the Pune Urban Data Exchange. The approaches which we have taken for this being data smart or management of data, there's a culture of data that has been created, and so that because of that, actionable intelligence can be derived from the data which is generated and which can be used for real-time decision making by various departments. City data policy is already in place, and in this policy we have taken care of all the contours of data sharing, privacy, data security, and ownership of data, which is being very much helpful. City Data Alliance has been created among the various entities which are working at the city level and hand in hand with Pune Smart City. So this has been helpful in promoting the data-driven solutions for the various day-to-day needs or the requirements of the citizens. We have also ensured that appropriate data platforms are in place, and through these platforms or open data portals, this data formats and data models have been made available, and we have ensured that data interoperability is there, and these platforms are being used for effective sharing and management of the data in the city. And the fifth approach which we have is the awareness of use of data. We have removed all the barriers and created a dialogue between various agencies and stakeholders who are working together in the city administration. So with these 5 approaches, we are going ahead with the putting in place the data-driven solutions for the citizens. Our integrated command and control center has been functional, has been gone live from January 2019, and the operational phase of 5 years is going on. We have already completed 11 quarters, and more than 720 elements are in place, which includes Wi-Fi hotspots, variable message displays, emergency call boxes, flood sensors, air quality sensors, and this data is being uploaded on the integrated on the Urban Data Exchange. Many use cases we have created. The major of them is the flood sensor use case. In Pune, there is a tendency of torrential rain and flash floods. 2019 saw a very severe situation of flash flood in the city. So since then, the integrated working in the command and control center of disaster management wing of the Pune Municipal Corporation, the smart city, police, and the revenue department, because of this, SOPs have been put in place, and the alerts given by the flood sensors in terms of the data discharge from the dams and the water levels in the rivulets and the rivers is being shared with all the stakeholder departments, and timely say advance intimation is being provided to the urban municipal wards and ward offices, who can well in time evacuate the families wherever it is required, and necessary precautions in terms of safety of the people is being ensured by this way. Secondly, health. We are also working on the health management information system, which will soon, which is undergoing testing, and which will soon will be in place, whereby we will be integrating the 82 the health institutions of the city, and overall working of comprising of 21 modules will be integrated with the integrated command and control center. The digital education platform is also being developed, which will also be integrated with this command and control center. So in this manner, a lot of data-driven initiatives are being implemented by Pune Smart City, and they have been put to use for the citizens.
That is truly a great demonstration of use of data for the city. As you've mentioned, how ICCCs are playing a vital role for actually monitoring and managing flood on real time, and also the health management system. If you could just also shed a bit of light on your other initiatives of how your open data portal or the policy or the alliances that have been created in the city are actually helping improve urban governance in the city of Pune.
Yeah. The major highlights of this open data policy is that it's the policy. The Pune city was the first to create this open data policy, or the city data policy, maybe around that was around 2018, 18 and 19, and documented set guidelines have been prepared, which ensure that proper management of digital information across all stages and data management cycles is possible in the urban setup of Pune Municipal Corporation as well as the Pune Smart City. The processes have been defined regarding the collection of the data in efficient manner and accurate manner. The technology is again, we have promoted open source and proprietary technologies so that there is a great data capture and analysis capabilities have been achieved. Capacity building has been done of all the stakeholders and the staff and the individuals involved in the management of data. They have been trained how to collect the data and using the, analytics methods or analytics tools to process the data. That has already been done. Data alliances have been formed and thereby various government departments and private sectors or the community organizations which are working with us. They all have been aligned with us. Resource building has been achieved, wherein data life cycle is properly been taken care of, and we are open to innovation, like hackathons and this innovation competitions have been conducted since last 2-3 years, and this has been continuously. It is helping to refine and improve our data policy and working.
Thank you so much, sir. Actually, this is a great way to actually also bring together an entire ecosystem and stakeholders in order to solve urban challenges together. So thank you, sir. We'll come back for concluding remarks, but for now, we'll move on to Mr. Anand Menon, Project Planning and Management Specialist from Agra Smart City Limited. I would like to ask you that Agra City has acknowledged the use of GIS for, data-driven governance also. What is your view on the use of GIS data to help improve urban governance?
So thanks, Meghna. So under Agra Smart City, what we have done is that we have done the entire GIS mapping of the city. And there are more than 20 to 25 layers on the GIS, whether it be the urban assets, like say water supply lines to sewerage lines to road networks, the tree cover, the water bodies, all these things are mapped in the GIS. So, and all these things becomes the data point. And what we have done is that 350,000 households, the residential households as well as the commercial and the mixed use properties in Agra, we have geotagged and we have put it in the GIS map also. So there are 2 to 3 benefits that we aim to extract out of it. One thing is that suppose the water supply line, the sewerage line, the ward wise also we get the urban assets. So at the end of the day, when the municipal commissioner or the city administration team sits and they need to plan, suppose most of the Nagar Nigams in UP are funded through the 15th Finance Commission funds. So when the 15th FC funds come, they will get an idea of which ward to concentrate on using this GIS map. Where is the gap analysis that is required? Suppose say sewerage connections, for example, in Ward 72, it is completed till 50%. So maybe X amount of rupees for the sewerage connections needs to be estimated in Ward 72. In other, there may be only 20% coverage. So X plus certain percentage of funds needs to be allocated. Then apart from that, regarding the tree census and the tree covers, that is also mapped using the GIS platform. So whichever areas, so when the plantation drives, etc. are being carried out, those areas which needs to be concentrated upon, that also will be available ready-made using the GIS map. And this entire GIS portal is being made available to the citizens, will be made available to the public also, and to the various departments. So later on, for example, when say Torrent Power or the Green Gas wants to dig a particular area, they get to know the existence of the utilities in that area also. And this is in line with Honorable PM's Gati Shakti mission, wherein the coordination of various agencies can be brought in together so that no reworking on the same road or no redigging happens at that time. Now, another thing that we are aiming to achieve using the geotagging of these property taxes is that the property details on 13-14 parameters like the name, address, mobile number, floor area, etc. and also is available at the GIS portal. And as a part of our SWM, ICT-enabled SWM monitoring, in each of these households, we have installed the RFID tags. So now what we are aiming to achieve is that taking the synergies from this GIS portal as well as this RFID tags, people can sit in their home and pay the property tax using this RFID tags only. We are linking with the UPI interface, etc. So that we aim to increase the collection efficiency of the property tax also. So one of the, if to summarize the impact of the GIS, what it has had is that one thing is that earlier the asset inventory or the what is available in which area was not known to the administrators as well as to the citizens. Now that things become transparent and that inventorization has happened. So the decision making becomes quick, and we are aiming for a planned decision making using this GIS portal. And using this GIS portal during the COVID pandemic also, lot of good benefits were there. For example, identifying the hotspots, the cases in those areas where the cases were more, that we could map. The heat maps were generated using the GIS portal. So even the fogging and the sanitation plan, Nagar Nigam planned using this heat map, and the barricading plan of the police and all those things were made much easier using this GIS mapping.
That is actually a great way to demonstrate how the power of data increases when it is shared with people, and how together we can make great use of data by demonstrating it in different circumstances. I would also like to ask you, how, in your view, does the Data Smart City contribute further to sustainability-oriented solutions?
Yeah. So what we have done is that not only us, but majority of the smart cities are a part of the climate-friendly smart cities also. So what we have done is that, like, one of the mandatory thing of the smart city is that 10% of the electricity consumption should be from the non-fossil fuel based this thing. So for that, we have tied up with UP NEDA to identify this rooftop solar water, the solar power, then many waste from compost, waste to energy plant. Now there was certain clearance issue that also has got been sorted out. So waste to energy plant from the municipal solid waste, etc., has also been set up in Agra. Then there are few innovations like that, from the flower waste to generate electricity, and from plastic waste to fuel. So those are some of the initiatives that has been done by the Nagar Nigam, so that the fossil fuel dependency of the city is getting reduced. Now, as a unique initiative, what we have done is that in the Agra Smart City building, the wall, we have started establishing the vertical garden. So what we aim to showcase to the city is that, rather than going in for the glass facades and metal facades, try to create the vertical gardens in the private institutional buildings and the government institutional buildings also, so that can act to improve the air quality index, because now in the NCR region, especially in Agra, the air quality index has been poor. So these are some of the initiatives in which that we are planning to take care of the environment. And apart from that, at 39 locations, we have put in the environment sensors, which actually measures 14 parameters like PM 2.5, PM 10, NOx, SOx, etc. And the hourly air quality index is also measured real time, and the data is being given to the UP Pollution Control Board. And especially in those areas where the smart city construction work is also going on, we measure the AQI hourly, and if the AQI is increasing, we take measures like water sprinkling, green net, etc., and all those things. So as is said, what we can measure is what can be improved. So that measuring that we have started, and based upon that, we are taking in the steps to improve upon that.
Absolutely. That's a great way to actually end your note, and also showing how measuring is the first step towards improving, and how measuring in almost near real time can actually help provide decision making at the real time as well. So thank you for this. Now we'll move to Shri Raj Chirubal, CEO, Chennai Smart City. So my question would be that Chennai has been one of the pioneering cities to create value from data through its exchange. In the use of IUDX and in light of the current or the recent floods, how do you think data has been used for better flood control in the city?
See, I think like the other earlier two gentlemen spoke, they've kind of covered a lot of things, like, for example, environment sensors, flood sensors, subways are being monitored through intelligent cameras. So when the level of water comes up, people are alerted and so on. So quite a bit of that work has happened. And more importantly, I think we actually won this year's award for the water body restoration. So that was part of the smart city. I think we have restored around 60, 70 water bodies, including temple tanks. But then the Greater Chennai Corporation took that forward, and they are restoring about 210 water bodies, which 5 years ago sounded almost impossible. People used to find that unbelievable that there are even water bodies here. But we have a long way to go. And the problem is that beyond what the other two gentlemen said is that, see, we have a lot of data now coming in. A few years ago, it was like everybody was running in circles finding data. The consultants will look for data, another consultant look for the same data all over again. NGOs will ask for data. Unless you file an RTI, you don't get the data, and so on. Now, I think the good news is that lots and lots of data is coming through IoT devices, through ERP systems, APIs, and so on. The problem we are facing is that use cases. So for 5 years, what we've been saying, telling the various vendors and so on, that think of a mayor, commissioner, average citizen, engineer of a city. They are not interested in data. They are interested in what do I do now? Okay, if a tree fell somewhere and the IoT device says a tree has fallen there, okay, fine. Now what am I supposed to do? Right? That's where the data's power comes in. Then our attempt now is to hopefully go to that level where so for example from data we should be able to say which are the most important potholes that are causing most of the accidents, deaths and problems in the road. So the commissioner of the city can take a decision saying, okay, first fix these potholes. Otherwise there is no data to decide which road. I'm sure there is some amount, but there's no scientific way to say which is the most important pothole to fix, right? So now that we are having rains and everybody's worried about floods, the question becomes from past waterlogging data, can we now help the next stormwater drain design or next various rainwater channels and canals? Do we design them based on that data? So I can go on and on and on like this. So one of my fantasy, I'm hoping we'll get it done, is that we have fixed the water body. Now, how do we maintain? Like, how do you know somebody's not encroaching? Can we use drones? Can we? I mean, of course, public has to keep an eye on it. There's no substitute for public participation and all that. But then there's only so much a person can go keep observing the water body. So you can't expect a corporation engineer to go check a water body every day. He or she has a million other things to do. So can we use drones? Can we use other mechanisms to alert if somebody is misusing the water body? So I think now that data is coming in, we have a long way to go to get to a Singapore or a Tokyo or a advanced city level where preemptively taking action, whether it's disaster or on a regular day, or learning from various problems, using data so that data and artificial intelligence and all can do the analysis and keep telling us, okay, this is where the improvement needs to be done, this is where the problems are. I think we have some more way to go, but I'm pretty happy that we are at least on the way. 5 years ago, all this would have been just pure fantasy. I mean, we'll keep talking about advanced cities, but now the fact that we are able to even discuss these issues is a major step forward.
Absolutely. And I think you've already taken a step in the direction of building use cases to use that data, I believe also on the Indian Urban Data Exchange and other platforms. So that's great. My next question to you is, what are the key challenges that you face while implementing policy-related solutions in the city or changes in the segment, and how do you mitigate such challenges?
So everything is the same. Like in India, in any Indian city, policy is the easy part. Anybody can put a piece of paper saying we have a policy. Because we have such disparate system, like, unlike other countries where you have institutional structures which are able to data or not, IT or not, they're able to coordinate among various departments, right? So data and IT and all is just a icing on the cake that helps do more. Here, the problem of the institutional structures are a problem. So, for example, if you ask another department for data, of course, because of goodwill we have, better relations we have, we get the data. But there's no reason why they should give that. Or even if they give the data, they may give you in a piece of paper or an Excel spreadsheet. Then to get to the API level and saying, look, I want your API so that my systems here can read, and I'll give you back analysis for you to improve. Policy is important, obviously. But then, like everything else in India, I think translating into action is not easy because of institutional and systemic problems. But the good thing is that from Smart City Mission in Delhi and from Tamil Nadu government, and of course the corporation, there's a lot of awareness now that we cannot continue business as usual. We need the systems to leapfrog. See, I always say this in every sense. Hong Kongs of the world or Shanghai's of the world took 50 or 100 years to get where they are, right? We don't have that luxury to sit back and do infrastructure-driven improvement. Well, infrastructure is obviously important, but we need to be able to use data to do that 80-20 rule, okay, which is the 80% of the problem that I can solve using limited resource of 20%, right? Unless we start thinking that way and being smart in those sense, because any given moment you have limited resource, limited capacity, limited staff, and the chaos of the system of institutional chaos. So if we have to leapfrog and get to make dramatic improvements in people's life in the short term, medium term, we have to start using that data to make those intelligent decisions. And I think there's a clear recognition of that from every level. And this is why I think, like, for example, the next step we are working on is a gigantic World Bank project called City Partnership. The first time in India, Chennai is going to be a so-called city partner with Tamil Nadu government and World Bank. And building on the various projects that various departments have done, not just smart city, but various other departments, so transport and water, there's going to be major investments. And a very important piece of this investment is institutional changes, data change, layer change. So there is something called a digital Chennai layer. So basically from intelligent use of data all the way to project management to ERP system, everything has to be upgraded in the city. So that serious conversation has already started in the city. So within the next few years, if everything goes well, we should have many of the systems that an advanced city has in terms of helping planning, in terms of reacting to problems, in terms of operations, and of course, project management and so on. So I think, yeah, we are in good shape, but like I always say, we have a long way.
Absolutely, and these are the barriers we're trying to break, and this is the culture of data that we're trying to create, in the hopes of reaching where we want to reach sooner than we thought. Thank you for this. Now, is Ms. Jayati Singh, CEO, Gwalior Smart City Development Corporation here? Is Ms. Jayati Singh here? Okay, can we move to Sri Chetan Nandani, CEO, Rajkot Smart City? Is he here? Okay, we'll come back to them a bit later. Do we have Mr. Braj Bhushan, Head Government Business Reverie Language Technologies here? Sai, unfortunately, we're not able to hear you. If you could fix your microphone, maybe that would help.
I think you should unmute him.
Can the technology people please help fix this? No, we're still not able to hear you. Sai, I think it would help if you try joining from another device, maybe. Just a suggestion. Till then, why don't we take concluding remarks from the panelists which are present here with us, actually. Dr. Sanjay Kolte, what do you think would be your views if you were to summarize in a minute on the way forward in the future of data-driven cities?
Yes. See, in the smart city mission, most of the cities have put in place their integrated command and control centers and the allied IoT devices, and a lot of projects are being implemented. E-governance projects are being implemented, which are finally being aligned with the ICCC. So after this generation of data is the first place, and having the data-driven data policy in place. Now, it is our endeavor. It should be our endeavor to make this data available practically to the citizens and to bring about the vision or the objectives of the smart city mission in the city in terms of, say, livability or the ease of living in this direction, and the sustainability part, the actions related to climate resilience. All these things should be now aligned with the data, and we should maximize the use of data for achieving these smart city mission objectives. That should be our endeavor for the future, I would say.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Mr. Anand Menon, your concluding remarks, please. You're on mute as well. Can the organizers please help unmute our panelists?
Meghna, am I audible now?
Yes, you are.
Great. Can I start? If
Okay, I think we're till the time we're trying to unmute our other panelists. Let's come back to you. Would you like to switch on your camera?
Since you have asked me to log in from other device,
No worries. No worries. No worries. That's no problem.
I have logged in from
Okay.
mobile. So
Okay. Yeah, we can see you great. That's
probably,
great.
yeah, probably this should work.
Yeah, this works. So earlier we actually had we saw the session of Mr. Vivekananda who spoke about how learning is important to build trust among citizens. Language adoption is important for that. Now this this technology of language adoption for excellence is sort of a new technology that we're hearing about. And so how do you think that language adoption for excellence in digital transformation solutions is helping India's smart city mission goals?
Great. So first of all, we would like to applaud both central and state governments, the panelists, the CEOs who has spoken on the smart cities and the initiatives which have being taken to the forefront, right? Which is the need of to emphasizing digitally connected citizens in our country who are language literals, which means English is not their first language. Though they have access to digital applications and everything, they might not be comfortable to transact or consume data in English. So considering these statistics, I'll cut it short, we have in the interest of time. So considering these stats, right? So when it comes to last mile engagement to the citizens, mandatorily delivered to in 22 Indian languages as defined in Schedule 8 of Constitution of India to make it more effective and adaptable to the end user, right? And, to take a few examples, though we have all embraced the new normal, especially the post-COVID scenario, when the MyGov team has launched the COVID dashboard, it enabled and delivered the dashboard in all Indian languages for the, ease of users. And strangely, we realized that the usage in Indian languages is much more higher than English, right? So language adoption encompasses the entire gamut of digital citizen engagement, be it in the field of education, finance, utility services, healthcare, or, now coming to the smart city interfaces, right? And any such industry segments or any such initiatives which are taken by the government. So this is where we are.
Okay, and in addition to this, what do you think are the further technologies in this space that are expected to be introduced?
So, am I audible?
Yes, we just lost you for a moment there.
Meghna, am I audible?
Yes, you're breaking a bit, but you're audible now.
Hello.
Yeah.
You're audible, Sai. You're audible. Okay, why don't we move to I see Shri Chetan Nandini, CEO, Rajkot Smart City Limited has joined us now. So welcome. I wanted to ask you that Rajkot had conducted a Smart City Hackathon earlier this year. Based on your experience, how did you use data and technology to provide for a smarter city? Can I please ask the organizers to unmute, sir? Yeah.
Yeah. You are talking of hackathon, and
yes.
You are talking of use of technology.
Yes.
Yeah. Hackathon, we try to trigger a culture where we involve students for our day-to-day decision making, and if we can get any out-of-box solutions out of it. So we did 2 hackathons in year on year, and the experience itself was very good. It was probably first hackathon we probably were on the wrong side. Probably we could not define the problem statement well. Our mentors could not brief the students well. So second time, probably we could frame a problem statement in a better way and guide the students also in a better way. And we could get some better solutions. And probably one or two we might use in our day-to-day activities. That process is going on. Use of technology in the city. Rajkot, we had a problem of rapidly increasing crime in the city. So we started with CCTV surveillance project. That was the first project in the smart city. And with that project, we could bring down the crime rate to 20%. And that was even mentioned by Honorable Prime Minister in one of his address. When we started the smart city, as a part of consultation with people, two issues emerged. One was water supply and another was traffic congestion in the city. Water supply, naturally, we decided we'll be putting to another scheme. And traffic congestion, we tried to introduce ITMS. And that project is almost executed. And the ITMS, I'll just briefly mention, we have installed turnstiles on our BRTS junctions. And that has really helped us in planning our bus routes, bus fleets, because we know the exact amount of footfall. Now, those machines are now integrated with electronic ticketing machines. So we know across the city, which earlier there was a constraint, there were some revenue leakages. And again, one more innovation is smart bus stops. So that has again increased footfalls in our transport. Smart bus stop also gives a ETA, estimated time of arrival, and that gives some comfort to the passengers, which has increased our revenues also. Again, we have started using GIS. GPR, we have done 100% profiling for the whole city. For e-governance, we were already doing well. Now we have added ERP. ERP project is going on. That will probably take 3 or 4 months. We are hoping that coming March we'll be completing our ERP, and from 1st April we'll be running live on our ERP. About use of technology in Rajkot.
These are great examples, both of how, while including different stakeholders and students in the community, we're able to solve challenges which is best suited to our citizens, and also how we're using data and technology to solve for the urban challenges in our cities. Would you like to, sir, highlight if there are any other major innovations that are in pipeline for Rajkot to be more data-driven?
Yes. We have developed the grievance redressal app as a part of our project. That is a very common thing, but we have put two things. One is the complaint solver, that is our employee. He needs to take a reference code from the complainer. So thereby he has to approach him and ensure that the complaint is solved. Again, when the complaint is solved, we take a rating. So rating is about the department, rating is about the employee, and there we are getting interesting trends. So every month we review those trends, which employee is the highest rated, which agency, suppose for sewerage we have outsourced agencies, which agency is highest rated, which ward has maximum number of complaints, which area has maximum number of complaints, which area has shown maximum satisfaction, which area has shown maximum dissatisfaction despite the complaint being solved. So such interesting data we are getting. Now we are again thinking of moving one step ahead, because every day we get a lot of suggestions. Probably we'll try to integrate those suggestions And when we prepare a annual budget, probably we'll try to integrate everything. What happens is every day we get a lot of suggestions, but usually they get lost in our bureaucracy. So what we'll try to arrange them functionally. We'll try to give it to our core groups, say our engineers, probably even to our students in hackathon, and probably come out with some meaningful projects or some meaningful solutions or something more better than what it is now.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. And feedback is a very important parameter of improving governance. So it's good to hear about how you're taking that to the next step. Thank you, sir. We'll now go back to Sai, if he's audible now.
Yeah, I think I'm audible. Right?
Yes,
So,
you're audible
yeah,
now. If
yeah,
you would like to
yeah.
talk about any further technologies in this space that you're expected to
Yeah,
be
yeah, I was talking about that. So, see, the smart cities mission, especially, it envisions to drive economic growth and deliver citizen-centric smart outcomes, right, by the use of technology, right? So, there are multiple areas in which new technologies can be introduced to make this mission more adaptable and citizen-centric, right? Especially in Indic language computing and the localization front. So I'll give you a few examples, right? The recent requirements which we see across all the smart cities, right, in terms of RFPs which are being driven. So imagine a conversational AI platform where, being implemented on a chatbot or an IVR bot or a voice bot on the website or the portal or maybe the mobile application, right? So there are IVR helpline numbers such as dial 112, and there are voice bots and chat bots implemented, and there is emergency response and disaster management. There is municipal corporation call centers. So everywhere there are bots which are required, and people are not so familiar talking in English and conversing with the end user in English and getting responses in English. So it should be real time and conversational. And also, we also have spoken about the traffic management systems, the solid waste management system, transport management system, municipal corporations, GIS platforms, water management, land record billing. So even Mr. Anand and Raj, so they have mentioned about the property taxes being paid on applications, right? So imagine this entire data is converted in real time for end users in their own preferred language. So the adaptability and the transactions will increase multifold when we take it, when we stop restricting it only to English, where people are uncomfortable with those, right? And the end user communications once the transactions are done, if you have transacted, if you have paid a property tax, there should be an SMS which should be triggered in your own preferred language to see what exactly is being paid and when is the next renewal date or something like that, right? So in a nutshell, the end-to-end localization of applications, including the feedback mechanism, where imagine a user typing in his own language to provide feedback to any of the government services which are being offered by the smart city officials, right? So there are legacy land records, there are judicial documents. There are so many areas where technology can be a backbone, especially in the Indian languages front, to enable this. So with that, I conclude and we can discuss more.
Yeah, so I think this is a great contribution to what we say, building cities for their people, where there's a sense of inclusiveness where people can actually speak and interact in the language of their choice. So this is a great initiative in that direction. I think we're kind of running out of time, so we'll just start with the concluding remarks. We'll go back to Shri Anand Menon from Agra Smart City Limited, who can probably briefly talk about their views on way forward on data-driven governance.
Yeah, so basically to continue from what I said earlier, as I said, data is a new oil. So now the thing is that with the establishment of integrated command and control centers happening in more than 75 to 78 cities all over India, and a lot of data points being generated, and many of the cities have started uploading in the Open Data Exchange And there is a Indian Urban Development Exchange also being set up in MOA in partnership with the Indian Institute of Science, of which Agra is also a part. Then there is Open Data Portal. So now what happens here is that, as Raj had also mentioned earlier, what to do with this data next. So now, like there are many young minds in our country, especially in the academia, especially in the colleges, etc. and all. So now what we need to do is that with the data that is generated, how we can make cost effective and implementable solutions to the citizens so that ease of living is actually improved in the city. Now, often what happens is that ease of living is actually confused with ease of doing business. Ease of living is that, suppose ultimately the cities belongs to the people. It is neither you or I. So it is the people who are the residents of the city who are the ultimate claimants of the city. So ultimately, for the benefit of them, this much of data that is generated, for example, ITMS or adaptive traffic control system is there. There are a lot of data points generated. What are the peak hours? How many number of cars have crossed each junctions and all those things. Now, if it is not able to reduce the traffic congestion of the major junctions in the city, then it's a question mark on the whole project as such. So ultimately, what has to be thought is that the data that is being generated, it is not the output, but how we can measure the outcomes of these projects and how the outcomes can be actually linked to the ease of living of the citizens. As a first step, ministry has already started coming out with the outcome monitoring framework and linking with the SDG goals and all. So, but there is a lot more can be done, and how we can bring in the right minds, for example, like hackathon, incubation centers, etc. and all. You will never know that there could be some Ola or Flipkarts of tomorrow coming that can be generated out of these data points that are generated.
Absolutely agree with you. Measuring outcomes and how we fed basis data is an important step forward. Shri Raj Ribal sir, any concluding remarks from your side? Okay, he's not here, I think. Mr. Chetan Nandini, sir, any concluding remarks from your side on way forward for data-driven governance for cities? Can we please unmute him?
Yeah, I think we have just started this journey. Probably when we first put up our ICCC, when we first received the data about our active signals, when we first received the data from our environmental sensors, probably, frankly speaking, we had no headway. We were not sure what to do with the data. But now, with a lot of support from Smart City Cell, and there are so many task forces helping us, slowly, probably we are learning how to, first of all, decide what data we want, how do we get it, and then third, most important, how do we do it for decision making. And that learning curve probably is going to rise very sharply in the years to come. So probably we can expect much more data enabled decision making in the years to come. And I think this is just a beginning. In fact, the best is yet to come.
I agree, sir, completely. I'm sure this is just the start of our journey towards data-driven governance and what it has to offer. Thank you to all our panelists for such an enriching experience, such enriching discussions. I hope you all had as much, I hope you all enjoyed it, attending it as much as I enjoyed hosting it and moderating it. Thank you everyone for attending today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all the panelists, for this such an interesting panel discussion. And now we would move to our another segment. Well, we have now, we'll be heading towards our next session, which is creating secure digital infra and sensitive public data protection. Well, at the beginning of this session, we'll have Shri Golok Semli, who is the Chief Technology Officer, Passport Seva, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. A very warm welcome to Sri Golok Simli ji. He would be giving presentation. Let's welcome Sri Golok Simli, Passport Seva, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India.
Let me at the outset thanks Governance Now, the entire team for bringing me here to deliver the TED Talk. Today we'll be discussing typically the how do we create the digital infrastructure at large in the government. And while we are dealing with such massive digital infrastructure, how do we see into the security and privacy framework, typically which is the need of the day. Now to start with, if we see today the kind of digitization happening, not only in India, but globally too, the kind of digitization happening, every department, every ministry, and not only in the public sector or government sector, but even in the private sector. What we find that these are posing new security challenges for all of us. And how do we deal with such security challenges while we are creating with such digital infrastructure, such complex applications, devices in one side, no digital infrastructure at other sides, and as I said, plethora of apps and enterprise application. What I typically find is, and what we have done and what we are experiencing is the major concerns, the major issues what we witness is when we create these kind of a massive digital infrastructure, the point we miss is to start with, I'll say, we need to understand our first workload well. What kind of workload we are going to deal in terms of your sovereign workload, in terms of your non-sovereign workload, in terms of your sovereign data, in terms of your non-sovereign data. And typically, if you ask me, the new normal scenario where your on-prem data center has become completely boundaryless, your corporate network, your corporate applications, your corporate data center has become kind of a remote environment, remote access, WFH kind of an environment. The data security framework, the data privacy framework, otherwise what we had defined has gone a complete kind of a relook and rethink, and rather I'll say re-strategize. Now, when I say so, if you see the new normal scenario where most of offices are remote, where our education systems are remote, where our health systems are working remotely. Now, if that is the shift happening, where are one should focus, and how do we have gone ahead when, as part of passport delivery system, when I was kind of a re-strategizing the entire passport issuance and passport delivery system, taking care of the remote workforce, taking care of WFH kind of an environment, and as I said, where your most of your resources, critical resources in terms of data, in terms of application, being accessed over net, right? Now, what we did is, if you see the overall strategy, first and foremost thing is you need to segregate, right? Segregate, saying that what kind of load or workload I do or I deal with kind of a on-premises workforce, on-premises, on-prem infrastructure, and what kind of workload I deal with remote. And while I do that, is that my workforce is ready? Is that my workforce requires skilling, reskilling, training, capacity building? So that is one of the mammoth exercise what we find and what I visualize every of us government department or ministry we have to go through, and which we have done. The second part which we find is, I generally have seen, mostly we don't understand the kind of risk we are carrying. Now, unless you have a risk assessment and risk methodology and risk analysis framework available with you, believe me, the data-driven business, what we are talking today, or the data-driven services, application, products, whatever I name it, it's very difficult to drive that data-driven business unless and until you understand the risks, what kind of risks you are carrying. Risks in terms of your organization at large, risks in terms of your business at large, and risks in terms of your employees at large, and overall risks in terms of your entire stakeholders at large. When I say stakeholder at large, means your beneficiaries and masses at large one side, and other sides all your stakeholders. Now, if you are capable to do that, the another 2-3 points which makes us kind of a re-strategize our entire data security framework is we have to have a data strategy now, which is kind of a long pending issue. Most of us, we do not understand what should be our data strategy. Now, when I say a data strategy means typically I see into 4 quadrants in terms of people, in terms of processes and compliances, in terms of business model, what kind of business model you have to drive the business, to drive the program or the project, what type of execution model you have, whether it is a kind of a centralized model, whether it is a federated model, whether it is a on-prem model, whether it is a cloud variance model. So the execution model, plays a very important role when you define your data strategy. And then last but not the least, the tools and technologies. Again, it's a kind of a very tricky game, because the kind of domain experts we need within the public sector or the government sector, it's completely, I'll say, not adequate enough. Most of the time we are taking help of a consulting agency, or at the best some of the consultants hired from the market. So that is another area which I find very vulnerable and which we need to strengthen. Then the last thing which we are realizing is, when we build this kind of a data strategy, data security framework, the other 2 very important aspects which again we are strengthening and we are completely kind of a updating or upgrading is, how do you compliance with the available laws of the land? Now, let me take here some few moments or few seconds. When I say available laws of the land, if you look back and go back and see the IT Act in terms of the need of the day, the upcoming data protection and security framework, which is in the parliament under approval, or even the kind of these kind of centers we are government is creating, whether it is critical information infrastructure per se, whether it is National Center for Information Infrastructure Protection Center, we say, whether we certain kind of agency, we say. The concern is, how do we kind of share our information on a right time basis, real time basis, so that the concerns any ministry or the department. Let me give an example here. Recently, what we found is there are a lot of fake websites which are hitting on a Google search, and most of the citizens are getting duped while they are applying for passport-related services. And since citizen is completely unaware of whether it is a kind of a genuine websites or a fake website, ultimately they were misleaded, misguided, and finally charged a hefty payment by that fake website, and finally they didn't get any service per se, right? Now, if that is the case, we as a ministry, or let's say we as a department, whom should we approach? Should we approach a law agency? Should we approach CERT-In? Should we approach METI? Should we approach NCIIPC? So these guidelines has to be very perfect and very kind of a straightforward, so that any of us, why only Passport Seva as a service, whether it is income tax, GST, railway, whatever it is, any public services at large, since there are multiple agencies working together to deal with this kind of a cyber threats, this kind of a malpractices happening over the cyberspace. What I personally find is we need to collaborate more. We need to share on a real-time basis between all of us, so that whatever we want to achieve. And finally, what I did, in fact, to deal with this particular problem, I took multi-pronged approach. Once we started writing to the law agencies. Second, we also written to the Google, saying that why is that Google is kind of a promoting paid aid, as these are the commercial websites who are duping the citizens. And the third approach we took is we wrote to these agencies, whether it is CERT-In or other agencies, so that they all together is aware of, and kind of in a collaborative way they should work out some mechanism to deal with. And believe me, finally we are able to kind of take care of this particular problem. Now citizens are almost on a very, very securely and safely lending to the Passport Seva website. This is another area which we need to continuously work on. The last thing probably I'll put up, saying that when we create this kind of a massive digital infrastructure within the ministry, within the government setup, or any department per se, what I find is today, if you ask me, it is more or less anytime, anywhere, from any device kind of a situation we are into. The country is already crossing with more than 700 million internet users, and the data says that we'll touch almost 1 billion internet users by 2025. And if that is the case, the risks are going to grow. The cyber threats are going to grow. And if that is the case, as I said, there are 3-4 strategy we need to adopt. The first and foremost strategy which we have done as a ministry or as a part of Passport Seva program is, you have to have develop a digital culture and digital ethics among your organization, among your stakeholder, and among the ecosystem at large, which largely or up to a great extent, I'll say we are successful to do that. The second very important factor we all need to keep in mind is, as I said, we need to develop a data strategy framework. We need to have a good data governance model to deal with these issues. The third thing I was saying about, I must know about my workload well, what kind of workload I am dealing with. Is it a sovereign workload? Is it a fiduciary workload? Is it a public data? Is it a configurable data? Is it a kind of a critical data for me? So unless I understand that, it's very again difficult to define the data strategy framework, which I am saying. And the last thing is, I would suggest saying that now the concept should be security must not be a post-facto audit. It has to be part of your design. It has to be part of your initial planning. And it has to be a continuous exercise and continuous effort. It is not kind of a post facto audit, somebody who is doing a yearly or half yearly kind of a audit. And then the very important thing is that every layer of your digital foundations, you are creating, whether it is a infrastructure layer, whether it is a access layer, whether it is a web tier, app tier, DB tier, storage tier, access tier. So every layer of the digital foundation or the applications you are writing, the security has to be intrinsic. The security has to be a kind of a imbibe factor of part of your design and strategy. To end my tech talk and on the security and how do we create this kind of a layered approach of security in terms of these kind of a massive applications, critical business which government is doing, which I have done. I have taken a 7-layered approach of defining my 360-degree security, right from my data layer to host layer to application layer to network and perimeter layer, and then on top of that, I have 24/7 SOC and NOC to deal with proactively and kind of a in a real-time basis whatever the security threats, either from in-house, internal or external, or from cyberspace, which is landing into the Passport Seva interface. So that's how I end it. I thank you once again, the governance now and the team for inviting me to deliver the tech talk. Thank you. Any questions? Probably I can take or thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, Shri Pulak Simliji, for sharing your views and your rich experience. Of course, our viewers must be enlightened after hearing your rich experience and what are the security checkpoints you keep while keeping ensuring the security of our passports data. And of course, a lot of technological intervention are being pushed in. So thank you so much for addressing this gathering and being part of this digital transformation summit and sharing your views with us. It's a pleasure and we are honored to have you amidst us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Purnima. Thank you.
So in the session of creating secure digital infrastructure and sensitive public data protection, we are moving on to our panel discussion, which is, of course, an important one session. And we have to moderate this session. We have some very eminent panelists. Let me give you a brief introduction about this panel. Amidst all the advancements with technology and its full scale implementation, the question that will always remain is how secure is tech implementation for a longer run without much intervention done separately. Where there is a technology, there is glitch for sure, and the security must be ensured that there's no lacuna, there's no lags, and it's whatever the data or is fully secure. So to ensure all this, what are the tools do we have in our hand? How our cyber experts do that? What government is doing? To discuss all these aspects, may I now request our eminent panelists to join this panel. We have Dr. B. Sundar, who is Special Secretary, IT, Electronics and Communication Department, Government of Andhra Pradesh. A very warm welcome to you, sir.
Thank you.
We have Kumar Veni, Special Secretary, IT and Electronics Department, Government of Uttar Pradesh. A very warm welcome to you, Mr. Kumar Veni. Shri Snehil Kumar Singh, Director, Kerala State IT Mission, Government of Kerala. A warm welcome to you, sir.
Thank you.
Ms. Revati Kumar, Chief Executive Officer, Goa Electronics Limited. Very warm welcome to you, ma'am. Dr. Lalkha Moana Colin, Joint Secretary
Thank
from
you,
Chief
Madam.
Informatics Officer. A very warm welcome to you. We are indeed honored to have you, Amit sir. He's from Department of Information and Communication Technology, Government of Mizoram. He's joining us from Mizoram. And Shri Sanjay Kumar Das, Joint Secretary, IT&E and State Information and Security Officer, Government of West Bengal. A very warm welcome to you, Shri Sanjay Kumar Das ji. And our moderator, Shri Mahindra Kumar, cybersecurity expert. Over to you, Shri Mahindra Kumar ji.
Thank you, Purnima, for this warm introduction. First of all, I would like to thank all these panelists here. It's an absolute pleasure to have to moderate this session with such an elite panel. And I'm sure they have more than 100 years plus of experience that we all carry in this panel today. So it's absolute my pleasure to moderate this session, and we'll talk about a very critical and absolute need of the hour topic today. That's about how do you secure our infrastructure, right? And at the same time, how do you ensure there is a protection for the data that is stored in these infrastructures, right? Irrespective of the classification, right? Restricted, sensitive information, confidential information, etc. So as part of this, I would like to have the viewpoint shared, from all our panelists here at their respective states, right? So in the era of this digitization that we go through, I wanted to understand how vulnerable are our systems from a security perspective, right? And also from a potential breach of the data, either stored on premises, either on moving, or either on use, right? So where does the Indian infrastructure, right, and how strong we are to combat any such situations that are coming across our way? So I thought I'll get some viewpoints from Dr. B. Sundar ji in terms of how they're trying to make sure that our systems are not vulnerable to any data breach, and his viewpoint about our overall situation across the Indian infrastructure to secure such systems. Okay, let me, while we kind of look into this technical issue of it, I thought I'll have this question posed to our, Shri Sanjay Kumar Das ji to, to give us a viewpoint in terms of how our systems are, able to handle any security breach or data breach that we see in the current scenario, and how do we combat such situations? So, sir, if you can give your viewpoint, that will be very helpful to kickstart off this.
Namaskar. Thank you so much. I hope I'm audible right now. Yes. Initially, there was some, technical glitch. Thank you for, inviting me, first of all, and second, this question is a pertinent question when we actually face this in the midst of a pandemic. The pandemic actually has ravaged the entire world, not in terms of health hazards, creating unemployment, but it has actually ravaged the entire approach towards data security, information security, infrastructure security. The entire security bandwagon has been relooked into. I think that this pandemic has brought the cybersecurity to become a very important discussion point in the board of directors. Earlier, if it were in the if it were actually hanging on a loose thread at the end of the agenda points. Right now, it is nearly at the top of it. Similarly, it is doing the same thing for the governments per se. During the pandemic itself, we actually faced an avalanche of state sponsored intrusive attacks on government infrastructure. When we talk about that, we definitely refer to the power situation that we witnessed last year in Mumbai. Then there were other similar instances across the country, including our state too. So we, and as I have been looking after the critical infrastructure in the state, information infrastructure in the state, as State Information Security Officer, so we have witnessed, as much as more than 60,000 unique intrusive attacks in a day, in a single day, on our state data centers and critical infrastructure. So what strategies, first of all, every state must have a state CERT. So that state CERT must come out with a specific implementable and executable, CCMP, the Cyber Crisis Management Plan. When there is a flood, if you go look out for your disaster management plan, you would find that, that disaster management plan might be a dated one. Similar thing happened with the CCMP, the Cyber Crisis Management Plan. So first of all, the state must have a state CERT, the Cyber Security Incident Response Team. It's a structured one, and its first implementable activity must be the CCMP, the Cyber Crisis Management Plan. Then the state Cyber Crisis Management Plan must be actually replicated in all the critical departments like power, transport, health, law enforcement agencies, blah, 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 and others. Then those implementable, CCMPs must be, actually that we call drills to actually undertake those CCMPs. You need to create situations so that those CCMPs are put to work and they are upgraded. And last but not the least, each and every department, each and every organization, including the district authorities, in the police, in the general administration, must have an information security officer, an information security technical officer, and incident response team. So these are the things that actually this pandemic has made West Bengal to start. So we actually followed this entire process, and this has led to actually declaration of all the critical information infrastructure notified under with the help of NCIPC, and they are properly validated and they have been actually made into follow the international best practices standards and to actually go for all sort of certifications. So as we are speaking, we have most of our critical infrastructures benchmarked as per international standards, notified with NCIPC, have ISO, ISTO, and incident response IRT at each and every level, executable CCMP, and on top of it all, the supervisory organization being the state CERT, it is keeping a close liaison with the CERT and NCIPC. I hope your question with regards to this can be answered like this, and this is what we have done over the last 1.5 years. Thank you.
No, that is absolutely perfect, sir. I think that gives a very good insight about your ability to combat the systems and protect the data. I think that's a very good initiative from CCMP to do the at a layer approach, right? And then you say the CERT can embark to provide that overall view of whether we are going right or wrong. So if you
drill is the most important thing. Once again, I would say cyber drill is the most important thing at every level. Whatever form we have, everybody has some sort of SOP. Whether this structure one has not yet implemented, even then, everybody must undertake drill at every level. At least that will enable our intrinsic strength to ward off, threats, whatever we face with whatever, strength we have. Thank you.
Sure. So I would like to get some viewpoints from Dr. B. Sundarji as well on the similar viewpoint that Sri Sanjay Kumar sir touched about.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, you
are. Governance, no, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to articulate about our experience and journey in cybersecurity. I should start with a very realistic but a slightly depressing view about how we, as a public sector, journeyed through the cybersecurity process. I'm quite sure that many of the states are in the same boat as we are in. Look, ideally, when we start with the concept of cybersecurity, what are we trying to protect? When we question this to ourselves, it is number one, problems with government web applications, problems with government mobile applications, and the security in the state data center or in the cloud where we host all the government applications. This is basically what we mean by saying that we are trying to do some kind of a cybersecurity measure. With reference to the state data center, because we engage high quality professionals from the electronics and the telecommunication sector, much of the controls are very much in place. The perimeter security, the application security, the drill, which my colleague Mr. Das was speaking, yes, that is all there in place. But the problem and challenge comes in persuading the various government departments to host their applications in the state data center. Now the various departments, we have around 35 departments in the state government of AP, and I'm quite sure that in other states too, we must be having a similar number. Now each department has at least around 30 to 40 web applications, an equal number of mobile applications. Many of them, they hire vendors to do their job. Now, vendors come in various colors, various hues, and various mindsets, various philosophies in IT for doing their respective jobs. They do deliver, but the journey the process they take for this particular journey will be invariably be different, because the coding, the programming, the philosophy of architecture itself will be quite different for each vendor. Now, to set right these things, we came out with a uniform government order based on MITI guidelines, that is the Ministry of Electronics and IT guidelines, how a web application should look, how a mobile application should look, what should be the criteria if the department wants to engage itself with the citizenry through social media like Facebook, Twitter, Telegram, so on and so forth. Now, where we faltered was in two respects. When the departments were hosting all their applications in the state data center, we said that a specific security audit by a certain empaneled should happen. So this broadly ensures that the naming is in perfect order, the IPv4 or the IPv6 addresses are in perfect order with reference to the registry of Indian domain names. But the actual coding where optimized memory and optimized processes, that we will never have a control because each programmer has a different way of executing and complying with the various requirements of the department. That is a small fraction, because what happens is, even if the programmer writes the most dirtiest of the code, what ultimately happens is the program will take longer. There will be more hiccups. The bug fixes will not be too accurate, but still you will have a working program and it will hog some more extra memory in the state data center, which anyway is fine with us. But the actual problem comes when the web applications, there are leakages. In the sense, I'm not talking about public data coming in or private data coming in no, that is not the issue. The issue is in many government applications, the username and the password, the common citizenry is able to enter into the application because many of the functionaries of the government, they use default passwords, default usernames. Sometimes with just one injection, SQL injection, you are able to get the username and passwords for the entire set of officers within the department. So these kind of problems we have been able to track, and we have been able to tell the concerned departments. Again, the problem comes when, because the IT department, the IT secretaries or the they are one amongst several other secretaries, it is becoming very difficult to convince others to comply with these kind of directives. The second set of challenges come when the departments host their applications in the cloud. Once they host their applications in the cloud, the state data center and all the IT department officials who are sitting here will not have any control over the application. This is the second challenge. And the third challenge comes in the resources we employ for cybersecurity. Let me give a specific example of our state. We have a AP Cybersecurity Operations Center, AP SOX, which we inaugurated with much fanfare. We had a very high-end engagement with some of the best in the industry for this purpose. But ultimately, what the AP Cybersecurity Operations Center with its rich set of tools, in fact, we use the IBM Watson AI tool for trawling all the web pages. But what ultimately it does is it is able to tell like a watchman whether somebody has illegally entered into the website, how long he or she has stayed in the website. But beyond that, you don't have any other, the cybersecurity operation tool does not say anything much. What is actually required is a complete audit, a security audit of the code, of the memory optimization processes, and so on and so forth. And this is an expensive affair. In the private market, one code review will cost anywhere between 2 to 3 lakhs. You need a very expensive tool costing about 1 crore and nearly about 20 to 22 lakhs as maintenance if you need a code reviewer tool. And this code reviewer tool is employed by one of our agencies, the AP Technology Services, for doing this. We have a 24 staff who work almost on a 24/7 basis, but to run nearly 1,040 applications, I'm only talking about web applications and not talking about the mobile applications. It's a humongous affair, and it takes at least 5-person man days to go through a complete security, and then we come out with 5 to 6 problems of the particular application. We write to the department to rectify it, and most of the departments, because of lack of budgetary support to have with the vendor, and many of them do not even have the source code with them, so it becomes a problem to fix the bugs. So in a patchwork fashion, over the last 8 months, we have been able to get 114 to 115 departments to comply with several of our problems, which I have just mentioned here. And the journey is quite afar because we have at least 1,070 web applications to cover, not to talk about an equal number of mobile apps and at least half the number of the social media web pages which the departments are encountering. So this has been our, in brief, our journey in the AP. At least we know the magnitude of the problem. We know what it costs. We know what are the tools that is required. The rest of the job is how we are going to acquire them and how we are going to speed up the process. So this in brief is the framework for our AP. I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sundar Ji. In fact, I think you really touched about some of the key points in terms of the tactical approach that you have taken, the operational part of it, right? And also to see how the landscape that you have, how do you cover those areas? And as Sri Sanjay Jas mentioned about, how that approach can be done, right? So that's where my the follow-up question would be that to say, how do we measure and demonstrate? Are we compliant to the things that we have implemented already, right? With our regulatory requirements or the data privacy needs? And if at the government level, what are the measures that we have taken to, to escalate as per our Indian cyber security standards, right? Which is to our global counterparts, for example. So in this topic, from a measuring perspective, I want to kind of get the viewpoints from Sri Kumar Vinit sir, and then from Snehal Kumar Singh as well.
Yeah, thanks, Mayan. I would really connect to what Mr. Sanjay had to say, that we had to drill down actually. And Mr. Sundar had clearly mentioned, he has given a very good perspective of what actually the government functioning is all about. Well, yes, I again confirm to his idea that IT department in any of the government setup is not the only funnel through which everything goes into, but the actual awareness campaign that has to happen at across the level of the government departments, that has to be really very, very high. And each and every department, irrespective of the at least the 23 departments who are directly involved into government to consumer business, like agriculture department or revenue department, likewise, they have amassed a huge data with them. For example, if I talk about Uttar Pradesh, recently you might have seen that not in just UP but in other parts as well, that we have transferred direct benefits to consumers. When I say consumer, I mean agriculturists, I mean beneficiaries of the different schemes and everything. Now, this data has to be made secure at 3 different levels. One is the department themselves. That is when they will come to the SDC on a co-location mode. So on a co-location mode, we just provide the infrastructure and everything else goes to the department. Now, how keen the department is, how keen the system is, how keen that particular organization is to keep the data secure is become a very important point. So in this perspective, if I would like to further explore that, yes, we also want to get into the private partnership models as well, so that we can get the best of the benefits, best of the issues that are coming up in the public, best of the practices that are coming up, which are not, we are not that much aware of. So let them come into the government system and let them help it out, because ultimately it is a juxtaposed position where the entire community has to go. It cannot be just segregated into a public or a private or something like that. Again, I would like to mention that with respect to Uttar Pradesh, we have done the cybersecurity perspective in 3 different levels. One is awareness. Second is different departments have to take the protocol that has been formulated by Government of India, and we are trying to get into the departments and to coax them and to really make them do the different certifications, the different security measures that have to be taken. And thirdly, and most importantly, which we are still going on, that we are trying to have our own cybersecurity policy, so that even at the level of the state government, that cybersecurity policy for the department as well as for the public is always there. Well, the personal data protection bill is already in vogue. So there are so many things, because ultimately when anything happens in the perspective, in the social perspective, then everyone looks at the government. So the onus lies upon the government that we have to collaborate with each and every department within itself, and we are not just confined to the government department. We have that onus to be, what should I say, we are liable toward the society as well. So social media thing, other issues, we need to give a good solution to each and every problem and a good awareness about everything. Not everything can be sustained, not everything can be taken care of, because cybersecurity is such a huge perspective, such a huge dimension, that it is not everything that is 0 and 1 in a unitary form of system. It is the fuzzy logic. Not every attack is a positive attack, not every attack is a negative attack. So it is not difficult to, it is not easy to comprehend whether we are really going into the right perspective of being the right moderator at the level of the government. So instead of being the right moderator, I would say that we should be the right dispenser of the information, so that everyone at every level is aware, right from schools to colleges to different levels. Recently, we have adopted a tablet and smartphone procurement scheme in Uttar Pradesh. We are going to procure approximately 25 lakh tablets and 25 lakh smartphones, and we are going to manage it through our own system, through which we are going to push into the educational content and help the students and youth be aware about their employment perspectives as well. Now to manage this entire system on the similar pattern, we are very much aware about the threats that we are going to face in terms of cybersecurity as well, and we are always working on that. So from government of UP point of view, I would like to conclude that yes, we are aware of the cybersecurity perspective, and we are constantly trying the departments as well as the government as well as the people to be aware of it as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Shri Kumar Vinit sir. What about your viewpoint, Shri Snehal Kumar Singh?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible? Yeah.
Yes.
So, first of all, thanks to Governance Now for giving me this platform and sharing with this distinguished panelist who have very rightly explained the concerns which state governments have. So, Kerala State IT Mission, we are the nodal agency for the Electronics and IT Department of Government of Kerala. Now, I just wanted to echo on certain points which the seniors have also mentioned, is that the data is very decentralized. If you see in the government, every department would have their own data sets. Every department would have their own web applications or their own mobile applications, and the way they deal with the data is very different. Now, when we come as a unit itself, yes, we have to ensure that the quality of the data is good and the security and the sharing of the data is limited. At the same time, ensuring that what kind of data has to be protected more. Now, those things are the things which we have started thinking upon, which we have started looking upon in Kerala, that, okay, for example, Civil Supplies Department would have certain amount of data sets of people who are, getting certain benefits. Now, what are this information and how are we going to probably use it in the policy making, or has to be protected so that it is not out? This is one element of the entire data perspective which I see from the government side. And for this, we are also working on a unified registry model in which the entire data of different departments will be linked and secured in a way that it is decentralized. This is one person will not be able to see the entire data. So we are trying to develop a structural bottlenecks for a person who wants to avail that data, and are we able to protect with the similar thing. This is one element. And the second element which I want to briefly touch upon is what Sir has also mentioned, is about CERT and units like CERT. Now we have in Kerala, CERT Kerala, who has been since 2012 working for preventing attacks, and obviously the auditing has to be done for all the web applications, and those are very normal routine things now. Now we are planning to have a major expansion of CERT Kerala. Phishing and ransom attacks have increased drastically. There were very petty incidences of defacements of government websites, which was done quite a few years back, but which led to the entire discussion about how protected our systems are. Apart from the fact that it is a huge embarrassment, the other part, the other element, which is that the data is very sensitive, as rightly pointed out. A simple information of a beneficiary availing certain XYZ service, if it gets out, it is a huge blot on that person. It can cause serious problems for that person and for any other person who wants to maybe use the data for some certain wrong purposes. Now, similar data breaches have happened in different departments. We are trying to expand our reach in terms of getting more skilled manpower and trying to build up the CERT as an institution itself. And we are going. The CERT Kerala is going to soon be impaneled under the MIT also, so they will also be able to do the auditing. One other perspective which I want to touch upon is the difference between cyber security and forensics. We are usually confused with all these two elements. And in Kerala also, it took us a lot of effort from our side to tell people that, okay, cyber forensics is something which probably police is going to do or some law enforcement agencies do, but cyber security is something which we have to do. And probably we are at the crossroads where we have to be streamlining and telling that, okay, no, this is our job. Please do not get into that. And explaining cyber security to other department itself is a huge task, which we are doing with multiple training modules. Our CERT Kerala and Kerala State IT Mission also has different modules for training all the government staff. So every month there are around 3 to 4 sessions of various departments where we tell them, okay, what is phishing? How do you have to protect your passwords? How do you have to store your data? So that is one part of what we are doing. Just as a concluding remark, I would also like to point out that getting things done from the department itself a huge challenge. As some seniors were mentioning that, see, IT department is one department, but there are other departments which have to be onboarded for this thing, and there has to be some kind of a central drive towards it. And data security is something which will affect you only once it affects you. Otherwise, you're just very oblivious towards the fact that you require some kind of data security SOPs and some guidelines. Although we have already issued those SOPs, but probably as Sanjay Kumar Das was also telling, that we need to have drills. And I completely agree with that fact that we need to continue having drills with the departments, telling them that please ensure that your systems are well maintained. Your officials are following the standard procedures for running the data, for managing the data. And with the use of Aadhaar numbers, with the use of other identification factors, there are a lot of things which complicate the matter further, both legally and technologically. So we're just towing the line and hoping that in the coming 1 year or 2 years, we'll be able to straighten out maximum of the applications which are running across the data centers, in our data centers. And with the coming of cloud infrastructure also, I feel that the burden of the state data center might reduce. But what kind of data are we looking at and storing in cloud or at the data center? We are deciding that, and I'm hoping we are in the right direction. And in the coming few months itself, we'll have a very strong data policy which tells us that, okay, this kind of data is priority and which this type of data is not in priority and can be stored in different levels of the government.
Thank you very much for that insight, Sri Snehal Kumar Singh. I think that really talks about the volume that you have done, and I'm sure there's a lot more to be done, right? As a continuity, I wanted to kind of touch on the kind of investments and the research that is being adopted to enhance the standards of cybersecurity and data at large, right? So I wanted to get view of Dr. Lathamuna and his viewpoint and in the state of Mizoram, right? Sir, if you can touch on this.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you so much for giving an opportunity to deliver some of the viewpoint from Mizoram. Actually, as Sanjay Kumar Das already mentioned about cyber crisis management plan. Government of Mizoram ICT department has already come out this cyber crisis management plan in 2015 as per CCMP guidelines framework released in the year 2019. We are currently updating Mizoram State CCMP. He also mentioned about drilling of this plan. Actually, it is really very important for drilling of this cyber security attacks and before it's take place. So we need to drill our people also. That's a very important point. He already highlighted those kind of important things. And government of Mizoram issued notification on critical information infrastructure in 2015 based on the IT Act 2000 section 71 and subsection 1 and 2. So, and we declared that the computer system and network installed at the government premises, which are directly or indirectly affecting the facility of CII to be protected system. As going on this as security concern, and this state data center, we should say, most of our government web application and e-governance application are hosted in our state data center. So our state data center is ISO 27001 standard compliance, which is Information Security Management System, ISMS, and it provides increased reliability and security of a system information, which improve our customer and business partner confidence. And we have a policy that before moving the application software into state data center, we must ensure that the software are security audited by Government of India authorized security auditor or Mizoram State E-Governance Society security auditor teams. We have a separate security auditor team. We extensively use OWASP, which is Open Web Application Security Projects. And for our web application security auditing. Like those OWASP, we can detect SQL injection, broken authentication, sensitive data exposure, XML external entities, broken access control, and security misconfiguration, cross-site scripting, injection decentralization, and using a component with a known vulnerabilities, and also at the last, insufficient logging and monitoring also we can perform. So mostly we actually use these OWASP tools for security auditing of web application development actually within the Mizoram itself. So as far as Mizoram is concerned, actually we treated this data leakage and prevention is very important. With the growing digitization has also increased data breach and cybersecurity threat. So data protection is one of the most important data security. We must have solutions for any organization in today's time, like ransomware, internal threat, and attack are growing, and key assets data needs to be protected at all ends. So data exfiltration, which we call it actually unauthorized transfer, copy of data, and retrieval of data from a computer or devices, that's data filtration. That can be actually difficult to detect actually. Data exfiltration is very difficult to detect, as the sensitive data which is being moved or transferred may lie within or outside the organization or the department network. So we require data leakage prevention, which is very important. We treat it as important in government. Like we want to stop intellectual property from getting stolen, protect sensitive design schematics, protect information about the product launch, and protect our confidence report. And we need to protect personal identifiable information. And also we need to protect a project report, design, and details. And also we have to protect strategy and planning data. And we need to stop uses of a blacklisted application and external devices. So Government of India ICT department has identified where security needs to be deployed and DLP data leakage prevention solution approach. So mostly actually user behavior management and analytics, data moving from HTTP and FTP, visibility of data moving to cloud and should be able to block, data moving through email from the employees also, encrypt our USB devices, that's also very important. Real-time alert and detail and bots view reports also important. User productivity and monitoring, attendance management, application listing, lower footprints of deployment, so many things actually. Data security is considered as an essential part of data management, which we treated as important here in Mizoram. So after COVID-19 pandemic, work from home is very popular in the private sector and government sector, even in Mizoram, in which there are a lot of chance of data leakage, which need to prevent. So this insider threat management is important, enforced encryption, real-time alert, employment monitoring, compliance monitoring, forensic investigation, so and so forth, so many things are there. So that's what we need to take care about this kind of data leakage. So that's all about my viewpoints in this scenario.
No, thank you, sir. I think it gives a very detailed view in terms of you touched about a lot of technical component from a user traffic and assets perspective. I think very importantly, just a quick time check here. We are on the top of the hour right now, but it was a great pleasure to talking. Has been a cybersecurity expert for so many years. It has been glad to hear that so many measurements have been taken. At the same time, as we protect our citizens' information, at the same time protect the critical infrastructure, it is imperative if we can look at unsupervised learnings that we can use at a lot of our state departments, right? So I leave that as a thought, and it was absolute my pleasure to talking to Sri Kumar Vinit, Sri Dr. B. Sundar, Sri Sanjay Kumar Das, Lal Muthna, and Snehal Kumar Singh. Thank you so much for this opportunity for Governance Now and to the elite panel here today. At this one, take care and have a safe journey. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.